My name is Emily Parker, and I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who would pull out a prenuptial agreement at Thanksgiving dinner. But when your mother-in-law calls you a gold digger in front of the entire family, you do what you have to do. 5 years into my marriage with Michael Campbell, I still couldn't believe how his mother Vivian looked at me like I was something she'd scraped off the bottom of her designer shoes. I'd tried everything to win her over, being polite, bringing thoughtful gifts, complimenting her home, showing interest in family traditions, but nothing worked. That Thanksgiving, sitting at the ornate dining table in the Campbell family estate, surrounded by crystal glasses that probably cost more than my first car, I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach as Vivian's cold eyes kept finding mine across the table. The tension had been building all evening, with her subtle digs about my upbringing and not-so-subtle questions about when I would finally give Michael children. I should have known something bigger was coming when she insisted I sit directly across from her rather than next to Michael. As the dessert was being served, a pumpkin pie I'd baked from my grandmother's recipe that Vivian had barely acknowledged, she cleared her throat and raised her wine glass. "I'd like to make a toast," she announced, silencing all conversation. Her eyes locked on mine as she continued, "To family, and to those who trap their way into it." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air, and I knew that the moment I'd been dreading for 5 years had finally arrived. I grew up in a middle-class family in Cleveland, where my dad worked as a high school teacher and my mom managed a local bookstore. We were comfortable, but never wealthy. I worked my way through college with scholarships and part-time jobs, graduating with honors before entering law school at Columbia. That's where I met Michael during our first year. I still remember spotting him in constitutional law, looking overwhelmed as Professor Harrington grilled him on a case he clearly hadn't prepared for. Later that same day, I found him in the library, desperately trying to catch up. "You looked like you could use this," I said, sliding my detailed case notes across the table. His grateful smile made my heart skip a beat. He was handsome in that clean-cut, preppy way, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he laughed. We started studying together regularly, and it wasn't long before coffee breaks turned to dinner dates. I fell for his genuine curiosity about people, his self-deprecating humor, and the way he listened like whatever I was saying was the most interesting thing he'd ever heard. 3 months in, he invited me to a charity gala his parents were hosting, and that's when I realized just who the Campbells were. Their family had banking money going back generations, lived in a mansion on the Upper East Side, and moved in social circles that included politicians and celebrities. The night of the gala, Vivian Campbell took one look at me, from my carefully chosen but clearly not designer dress to my sensible heels, and her smile froze. "So you're the study partner Michael's mentioned," she said, her tone making it clear that study partner was all I would ever be in her eyes. Despite her cold reception, Michael and I grew closer, and by graduation, we were talking about marriage. That's when Vivian intervened with her non-negotiable requirement, a prenuptial agreement. "It's just standard for families like ours," Michael explained awkwardly as we sat in our tiny apartment. "Mom insists every Campbell spouse signs one." Though it stung, I agreed without hesitation. "I'm marrying you for love, not money," I told him. "I don't care about a prenup." What I didn't say was how it hurt that his mother thought I was after their fortune when I was already on track to make partner at my firm within a few years. Michael apologized repeatedly but never actually stood up to Vivian. "She'll come around once she gets to know you," he promised. Our wedding was beautiful but tense. Vivian micromanaged every detail and made sure I knew the Campbells were generously paying for everything. Still, the early years of our marriage were mostly happy. We bought a brownstone, with help from Michael's trust fund, which Vivian never let me forget, and I threw myself into my career while Michael worked at his father's investment firm. During those first few holiday gatherings with the Campbells, I tried everything to win them over, complimenting Vivian's impeccable taste, offering to help in the kitchen, bringing thoughtful gifts. But Vivian's responses were always the same. Tight smiles and backhanded compliments like, "How impressive that you can work such long hours and still find time to attempt baking." I kept telling myself things would improve, that she just needed time to see I truly loved her son. By our second anniversary, I was making a name for myself at Harrington Price & Associates, handling high-profile corporate cases and bringing in significant clients. Meanwhile, Michael was doing fine but not exceptional work at Campbell Financial. The power dynamic Vivian had expected, her successful son with his decorative wife, was shifting, and she didn't like it one bit. Her passive-aggressive comments evolved into more pointed attacks. "Emily, darling, you missed the last 3 family Sunday brunches for work. Don't you think your priorities are a little unconventional for a Campbell wife?" she'd say within earshot of everyone. When the firm hosted a holiday party and my photo appeared in the business section alongside the managing partners, Vivian called to ask if I was still planning to have a family at some point, because Campbell men need strong family support to thrive. The microaggressions became more frequent. When the extended family gathered for photos at Christmas, Vivian somehow managed to position everyone, so I ended up excluded from half the shots. "Oh, Emily, I didn't see you there," she'd claim innocently. She forgot to mention family events. Until the last minute, sent birthday gifts to Michael addressing them only to him, and consistently introduced me as Michael's wife, rather than by my name. Each time I tried addressing these slights privately with Vivian, she'd turn it around on me. "You're being overly sensitive," she'd say with a dismissive wave. "Perhaps if you weren't so exhausted from working all those hours, you wouldn't misinterpret simple oversights." When I shared these experiences with my mother during our weekly calls, she urged patience. "Kill her with kindness, Emmy. Don't give her ammunition." What hurt most was Michael's response when I'd bring up his mother's behavior. "That's just how Mom is with everyone," he'd insist, though I could clearly see it wasn't true. His sisters-in-law, women from backgrounds similar to the Campbells, were welcomed with open arms, included in the ladies' lunches I never got invited to. I started noticing other family members exchanging glances when Vivian made her comments. Michael's younger sister Abigail once whispered, "I'm sorry about Mom. She's terrible to everyone she sees as competition." Competition? The word stuck with me. I wasn't competing with Vivian for anything, except perhaps her son's loyalty, a battle I was increasingly worried I might lose. I channeled my frustration into my work, staying later at the office and taking on challenging cases that required my full attention. The more successful I became, the more I could feel Vivian's resentment growing. Still, I tried to maintain the peace for Michael's sake, smiling through gritted teeth at family gatherings and responding to her barbs with forced politeness. Maybe she just needs more time, I kept telling myself, wondering how many years it would take for her to accept that I wasn't going anywhere. When I made junior partner at 30, the youngest in the firm's history, Michael organized a celebration dinner at our favorite restaurant. "I'm so proud of you," he said, raising his glass across the candlelit table. "Your name on the firm's letterhead next, right?" That moment of pure support made everything else worthwhile. But my professional milestone only intensified Vivian's campaign against me. Michael's own career had plateaued somewhat. He was good at his job but lacked the cutthroat ambition of others at Campbell Financial, including his older brother. At family gatherings, I'd overhear Vivian's stage whispers. Michael could be doing so much better if he weren't always accommodating Emily's schedule. The first major breaking point came at Michael's 35th birthday dinner. Vivian had insisted on hosting at their country club, inviting extended family and Michael's college friends. I'd been in court all day on a major case and barely made it to the venue on time, still dressed in my work suit. As I slid into my seat beside Michael, Vivian's gaze raked over me disapprovingly. "So glad you could fit your husband's birthday into your busy schedule," she remarked loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. I forced a smile and apologized for cutting it close. The evening progressed relatively smoothly until dessert, when Vivian tapped her glass for attention. After a florid speech about Michael being the perfect Campbell son, she turned her focus to me. Now, what we're all wondering is when Emily will find time in her impressive career to give Michael children. The Campbell legacy needs to continue. After all. Her eyes locked challengingly on mine across the table. Biological clocks wait for no one, dear, not even law partners. The table fell uncomfortably silent. Michael's father shifted awkwardly in his seat. Before I could respond, Michael put his arm around me. "Mom, Emily and I will have kids when we're ready. Tonight's about celebrating, not family planning." I squeezed his hand gratefully, but Vivian wasn't finished. "I'm only saying what everyone's thinking. Is it unreasonable to wonder if some people are simply too selfish or career-obsessed to prioritize family?" The word selfish hung in the air like poison. Several guests suddenly became very interested in their dessert plates. Michael's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "That's enough, Mom," he said quietly but firmly. The rest of the evening was awkward, with conversation flowing artificially around the tension. In the car ride home, I fought back tears as Michael apologized for his mother's behavior. "She was way out of line. I'm really sorry, Em." But then he added, "She's from a different generation. She doesn't understand women can have careers and families." His qualifier felt like a betrayal, minimizing her deliberate cruelty as mere generational confusion. "This isn't about generations, Michael. Your mother just called me selfish in front of 30 people for prioritizing my career." "She didn't mean it like that," he sighed, eyes on the road. "She wants grandchildren and doesn't know how to express it appropriately." I turned to stare out the window, a familiar doubt creeping in. Was I being too sensitive? Was my career focus coming at the expense of our marriage? Would a better wife have already given Michael children? That night, as Michael slept peacefully beside me, I lay awake wondering if Vivian might be right after all. After the birthday dinner incident, Michael and I had several serious conversations about starting a family. While I'd always planned on having children, Vivian's public attack had pushed the timeline front and center. "I want kids too," I told Michael as we sat on our rooftop garden one Sunday morning. "But I want us to have them for us, not to satisfy your mother's timeline." Michael agreed, and we decided to start trying. Months passed without success, and what had begun as an exciting new chapter turned stressful. Each month's disappointment weighed heavily, especially with Vivian's constant inquiries about any news to share. When we'd been trying for almost a year, my gynecologist suggested fertility testing for both of us. The results showed I had a mild case of endometriosis that might be complicating conception. It was manageable with treatment, but hearing the news was still devastating. The doctor was optimistic, recommending some medications and possibly minor surgery if needed. "Many women with far worse cases conceive successfully," she assured me. I shared everything with Michael, including the pamphlets on treatment options. He was supportive but clearly uncomfortable with medical details. "Whatever you need to do, I'm with you," he said, squeezing my hand. The next weekend, we went to Sunday dinner at the Campbell estate. I hadn't planned to discuss our fertility journey with the family yet, but somehow Vivian already knew. "I hear you've been to a specialist," she said casually as she passed me the bread basket. My stomach dropped as I realized Michael must have told her. "Endometriosis runs in families, you know. Was your mother affected?" Her tone suggested I'd hidden a hereditary flaw. "Actually, no," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "And the doctor is very positive about our chances with treatment." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Well, let's hope the treatments don't interfere with your busy work schedule too much." Over the following months, as I began fertility treatments, I noticed Michael spending more time with his family without me. "You should rest," he'd say before heading off to his parents' place. "No need for both of us to go when you're not feeling well." The distance between us grew. He stopped sharing details about his family gatherings, and I stopped asking. My hormonal treatments made me emotional, and the stress of balancing a demanding job with doctor appointments was exhausting. One evening, I was having dinner with Abigail, Michael's sister, who had become a quiet ally. After her second glass of wine, she let something slip. "I wish Mom would stop telling everyone your fertility issues are entirely your fault." Michael finally told her to stop at last week's dinner. I nearly choked on my water. "What dinner?" "The family dinner last Thursday." "Michael didn't tell you?" she asked, looking uncomfortable. "He said you were working late." I had actually been home that night, having canceled a client meeting because I was feeling unwell from my medication. The realization that Michael had lied hit me like a physical blow. When I confronted him that night, his defensiveness spoke volumes. "I didn't think it was important," he claimed. "And yes, Mom has made some comments about the fertility stuff, but that's just how she processes things." "By blaming me to the entire family? And you're defending that?" I asked incredulously. "I'm not defending it," he said, voice rising. "But you don't exactly make things easy. You're always working or too tired from treatments. Mom says—" He stopped abruptly, but it was too late. "Mom says what, Michael?" I demanded. "Nothing. Forget it." But I couldn't let it go. No, I want to hear what wisdom Vivian has to share about our marriage and my body. After several tense moments, he sighed. She thinks you might be too stressed about work for the fertility treatments to take. That maybe if you cut back hours? So now your mother is my reproductive endocrinologist? I interrupted, furious tears forming. This isn't about my job. This is about your inability to choose between your wife and your mother. The argument escalated, with years of pent-up frustration pouring out. I'm tired of being the only one. Fighting for us, I finally said. You've never once truly stood up to her. Michael's expression hardened. Maybe because there's some truth to what she says. His words hung between us like a physical barrier. Later that night, after hours of painful conversation, we agreed to try harder. Michael promised to create more boundaries with his family, and I promised to be more present when not working. But lying in bed beside my husband, who now felt like a stranger, I wondered if our marriage could survive being caught between my ambition and his mother's manipulation. One Saturday morning, while Michael was at the gym, I was using his laptop to check our joint investment account when a new email notification popped up. The subject line caught my eye. Emily situation. It was from Vivian. I know I shouldn't have clicked it, but after years of being undermined, my finger moved almost involuntarily. What I found was worse than I could have imagined. An entire email thread between Michael and his mother going back months. I've arranged for you to have lunch with Rebecca on Thursday, one of Vivian's emails read. She's just made junior. Associate at your firm, comes from the Wellington family, and is exactly the kind of supportive partner a Campbell man needs. No career obsession, wants a large family. Just meet her. What harm could it do? I scrolled up with shaking hands to see Michael's response. Mom, I'm still married. I can't have lunch with someone you're obviously trying to set me up with. My momentary relief was crushed by his next sentence. Things with Emily are complicated right now, but lunch with Rebecca wouldn't be appropriate. Not, I love my wife, not, stop interfering in my marriage, just that it wouldn't be appropriate given the timing. I kept reading, discovering dozens of exchanges where Vivian strategized ways to undermine our marriage. The fertility issues are a blessing in disguise, she wrote in one particularly painful message. Imagine being tied to her forever through children. Michael rarely directly endorsed his mother's schemes, but his responses were tepid defenses, at best. Emily's not as bad as you make her out to be, or, let's discuss this in person, not over email. The final email in the thread, sent just yesterday, contained Vivian's latest plan. I've invited Rebecca to Thanksgiving dinner. Emily will be too busy with dessert to notice, and you can see how naturally Rebecca fits with the family. Trust me, this is for your happiness. Michael's response, let me think about it. I was still staring at the screen, numb with shock, when Michael returned from the gym. He took one look at the laptop and the color drained from his face. Emily, I can explain. Explain what? My voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Explain how you've been discussing our marriage with your mother, how you've been letting her orchestrate meetups with potential replacements for me, or how you're thinking about having her invite one to Thanksgiving dinner. The confrontation that followed was both explosive and revealing. Michael alternated between defensive anger, you had no right to read my private emails, and placating excuses. Mom means well, she just wants me to be happy. When I pointed out that a truly loyal husband would have shut down Vivian's manipulations, immediately he countered with accusations about my priorities. Can you blame her for wondering if you're the right fit? You're barely home, Emily. When's the last time we had dinner without your phone buzzing with work calls? The argument circled for hours, eventually wearing down to an exhausted impasse. I think we should consider separation, I finally said, the words feeling like broken glass in my throat. Michael's expression shifted from anger to panic. No, Em, please. I know I've messed up. I should have shut Mom down completely. I can do better. His sudden vulnerability cracked my resolve. I'll tell her to back off completely. I'll show her those boundaries you've been asking for. Just please don't give up on us. Against my better judgment, and after many tears from both of us, I agreed to try one more time. Michael promised to start therapy to work on his family, boundaries, and I promised to make more space for our marriage. That night, I lay awake wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life by giving him another chance. The next morning, I called my therapist for an emergency session, needing professional guidance to process the betrayal. "You've been gaslit for years," Dr. Reynolds said after I recounted everything. "The question now is whether your marriage can recover and whether you want it to." Her words stayed with me as Michael and I entered our last chance phase, with notably less contact with the Campbells. For 6 months, things improved. Michael attended therapy weekly. We had regular date nights, and Vivian's presence in our lives diminished significantly. For 6 months, our marriage seemed to be healing. Michael maintained his distance from his family, only seeing them occasionally and always with me by his side. He was more attentive, more present, and for the first time in years, I felt like his priority. We'd even resumed fertility treatments with renewed hope. Then came an unexpected olive branch from Vivian, a handwritten note inviting us both to dinner to start fresh. Michael was elated. "See? She's trying, Em. This is huge for her." Against my better judgment, I agreed to a carefully controlled dinner at a neutral restaurant. To my surprise, Vivian was on her best behavior, asking thoughtful questions about my cases, complimenting my recent win in court, even mentioning she'd read an article about me in the legal journal. "I may have been overly protective of Michael," she admitted over dessert, "but I hope we can move forward as family." The evening ended with tentative optimism. Over the next few weeks, Vivian maintained her new persona, sending congratulatory flowers when I won a major case, inviting us both to casual family gatherings where she made visible efforts to include me. Michael was overjoyed. "I told you she could change," he said repeatedly. When Vivian invited us to Thanksgiving at the Campbell estate, Michael was practically begging me to accept. "Please, Em. It means so much to me to have everyone together for the holiday. Mom's really trying. She even asked what dessert you'd like to bring." Against every instinct, I agreed. "Thanksgiving sounds nice," I said, hoping this truly marked a new chapter. The week before Thanksgiving, I was searching for Michael's good cufflinks in his dresser for a charity event we were attending when I found a crumpled receipt tucked in the back of the drawer. The receipt was from Bernard and Associates, one of the city's top divorce attorneys, dated just 3 days earlier. My hands trembled as I smoothed out the paper, noting the charge for a 1-hour consultation. That night, I waited until dinner to confront him, watching him chat about his day as if everything was normal. "I found something interesting today," I said casually, placing the receipt beside his plate. Michael froze, fork midway to his mouth. "I can explain," he started, the same words he'd used during our email confrontation. "It's not what you think." "So you didn't meet with a divorce attorney on Tuesday?" "I did, but it was just exploratory," he stammered. "Mom thought I should know my options before." "Your mother," I interrupted, a strange calm settling over me. "Of course." Michael hurried to explain that Vivian had suggested he protect himself before the holidays, insisting it was just in case things didn't work out. "It didn't mean anything," he pleaded. "I'm committed to us." I simply stood up, cleared my plate, and walked upstairs to our bedroom, locking the door behind me. Through the door, Michael continued his desperate explanations. It was just one meeting, he hadn't filed anything. He was still committed to therapy and our marriage. I sat on our bed, staring at wedding photos on the wall, realizing with perfect clarity that nothing had changed. Vivian had simply gotten better at hiding her manipulation, and Michael was still the same conflicted man, caught between wife and mother. The next morning, Michael found me in the kitchen, packed overnight bag at my feet. "I'm staying at Jen's for a few days," I said, referring to my college roommate who lived nearby. "I need space to think." His face crumpled. "Please don't go. Thanksgiving is next week. We can still fix this." I considered canceling Thanksgiving then and there, but something stopped me. A plan was forming, one that would bring this 3-person marriage to its inevitable conclusion. "I'll be at Thanksgiving," I assured him, voice steady. "Wouldn't want to disappoint your mother." As I walked out the door, I already knew exactly what I needed to do. I spent the next few days at Jen's apartment, finalizing my strategy and gathering what I needed. I called my office to warn them I might need to take emergency leave soon. I contacted a realtor friend about listing the brownstone. Most importantly, I retrieved something I'd kept locked in my personal safe for 5 years, the original signed copy of our prenuptial agreement. Thanksgiving Day arrived crisp and clear. I wore a deep burgundy dress that projected confidence, applied my makeup carefully, and drove myself to the Campbell estate rather than riding with Michael as originally planned. I needed my own escape route. The sprawling stone mansion was decorated impeccably for the holiday, with tasteful autumn arrangements and the subtle scent of cinnamon and cloves in the air. Michael was waiting anxiously by the door. "You came," he said, relief evident in his voice. I wasn't sure. I said I would, I replied simply, handing my coat to the waiting staff member. The great room was already filled with Campbell relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, Michael's siblings, and their spouses, all mingling with cocktails in hand. Vivian spotted me immediately, crossing the room with practiced grace. "Emily, darling, so glad you could join us," she said, air kissing near my cheek. Her eyes assessed me coolly before adding, "Michael mentioned you might be too busy with work to attend." The first dig, delivered with a smile. I just smiled back pleasantly. I wouldn't miss it. Vivian steered me toward the bar where she'd arranged a receiving line of sorts. "You remember everyone, of course," she said, guiding me through perfunctory greetings. Then we reached a young woman I didn't recognize. Petite, blonde, wearing a modest but clearly designer dress. "And this is Rebecca Wellington. She just joined Campbell Financial's legal department. Michael's been mentoring her." My stomach dropped as I instantly recognized the name from the emails. The replacement candidate right here at Thanksgiving dinner. Rebecca extended her hand with a smile that was either innocent or extremely well-practiced. "So nice to finally meet Michael's wife. He speaks so highly of you." I shook her hand, maintaining my composure. "Interesting. He's never mentioned you." An awkward silence followed before Vivian smoothly interjected. "Rebecca's father is Judge Wellington. You must know him from your courthouse dealings." The message was clear. This girl had connections that would impress even me. Throughout the pre-dinner mingling, I watched Vivian strategically position Rebecca near Michael at every opportunity, refreshing his drink, asking him questions that highlighted his knowledge, laughing a bit too enthusiastically at his jokes. Michael himself seemed uncomfortable, but didn't shut it down. When we finally moved to the dining room, I discovered the seating arrangement. Michael at one end of the long table, his father at the other. Vivian had placed herself to her husband's right, with Rebecca beside her, while I was positioned far down the table between Michael's elderly uncle, who was hard of hearing, and a second cousin visiting from Europe. The isolation tactic was obvious. As the meal progressed through multiple courses, I observed the dynamic with detached interest, almost as if I were watching a play rather than participating in it. Vivian repeatedly directed conversation toward topics that highlighted Michael and Rebecca's commonalities, their shared alma mater, mutual friends, similar upbringings. "Rebecca's family has a summer home just 2 properties down from ours in the Hamptons," Vivian announced. Such a small world. When the conversation turned to careers, Vivian seized her opportunity. "Emily's doing brilliantly at her firm, of course," she said with faux admiration. "Though I do wonder how anyone manages such demanding work and a fulfilling personal life." She turned to Rebecca. "Rebecca's father arranged a position that allows for work-life balance, didn't he, dear?" Rebecca nodded. "Family comes first, in my view. A career is important, but not at the expense of what truly matters." Several family members glanced my way, clearly recognizing the targeted comment. The tension in the room was building, but I maintained my calm, waiting. The pivotal moment came during dessert, ironically as my homemade pumpkin pie was being served. Vivian had been drinking steadily throughout dinner, and her facade was slipping. "This reminds me," she said, tapping her crystal water glass. "For attention, we should discuss holiday gift coordination. Rebecca, you must join our traditional ladies' luncheon next week for planning." The luncheon I'd never once been invited to in 5 years of marriage. Michael finally seemed to register the inappropriateness. "Mom, I'm sure Rebecca has her own family traditions." But Vivian was on a roll. "Nonsense! Rebecca understands the importance of family connections, don't you, dear?" Then she looked directly at me and delivered the blow she'd clearly been planning all evening. "Some people marry into families without ever truly becoming part of them. Some people trap themselves. A Campbell man thinking they've secured their place, but never understand what it means to prioritize family over ambition. A collective intake of breath around the table. Michael's father looked mortified. "Vivian, that's enough," he said quietly. But Vivian, emboldened by wine and years of unchecked behavior, continued. "Let's be honest for once. Everyone knows. Emily married Michael for the Campbell connections, the Campbell money, the Campbell prestige. A gold digger with a law degree is still a gold digger." The dining room fell completely silent. All eyes darted between Vivian and me, waiting for the explosion. Michael half rose from his chair, face flushed with embarrassment. "Mom, stop it right now." But I cut him off with a raised hand, surprising everyone with my calm demeanor. The silence in the dining room was absolute as I carefully dabbed my lips with the linen napkin and placed it beside my half-eaten pie. "It's interesting you should bring up gold digging, Vivian," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I've been waiting 5 years for you to be this direct." I reached for my purse hanging on the back of my chair and removed a thick document bound with a blue cover. Every eye in the room followed my movements as I stood up, smoothing my dress. For those who don't know, before I married into this family, Vivian insisted I sign a prenuptial agreement. She personally selected the attorney who drafted it, refusing to let me use my own counsel. I moved to stand at the empty space between Michael and his father at opposite ends of the table, ensuring everyone could see me. I've carried this document with me every day since I discovered Michael consulting with a divorce attorney last week. Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table. Michael's face drained of color. "Emily, please." I held up my hand again, silencing him. "No, Michael, it's time everyone heard the truth." I opened the document to the first flagged page. This prenuptial agreement, which Vivian so carefully orchestrated, stipulates that in the event of a divorce, I am entitled to absolutely nothing from the Campbell family assets. I turned to the next flagged section. It further specifies that any property purchased during our marriage using funds from Michael's trust, including our brownstone, remains solely his property. I looked directly at Vivian as I continued. Interestingly, there's also a loyalty clause stating that if I ever speak negatively about the Campbell family in public, I forfeit even my personal possessions acquired during the marriage. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Several relatives stared at their plates. Now, for the gold digger accusation to hold water, I would need to actually benefit financially from this marriage, wouldn't I? I turned to another flagged page. Let's look at the income disclosure forms we both submitted when signing this agreement. At the time of our marriage, Michael's annual income from Campbell Financial was $360,000, plus approximately $200,000 in trust disbursements. I flipped to the next page. My starting salary at Harrington, Price & Associates was $140,000, with no family money to speak of. I paused to let that sink in before continuing. Last year, my income as junior partner was $790,000. Michael's remained roughly the same. I closed the document with deliberate slowness. So, help me understand, Vivian. Exactly whose money am I digging for? Vivian's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you discuss financial matters at the dinner table?" she sputtered. "This is entirely inappropriate." More inappropriate than calling me a gold digger in front of the entire family? More inappropriate than inviting my husband's prospective replacement to Thanksgiving dinner? I turned to Rebecca, whose eyes were wide with shock. "I'm sorry you've been dragged into this. I don't believe you knew what role you were being cast in today." She shook her head quickly, looking mortified. I addressed the table at large. "I discovered weeks ago that Vivian has been actively trying to break up our marriage for years. I found emails where she explicitly discussed finding Michael a more suitable wife from the right background." Michael stood up abruptly. "Emily, that's enough. We can discuss this privately." "No, Michael, we can't. That's the problem." I turned back to him, letting my composure crack slightly for the first time. For 5 years, I've tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect Campbell spouse. I've endured snubs, insults, and manipulations. I've watched you choose your mother over me repeatedly while claiming to love me. I looked around at the stunned faces of his family. You all have witnessed this behavior for years and said nothing. Your silence made you complicit. Michael reached for my arm. Please, let's go home and talk about this rationally. I stepped back from his touch. There's one more thing everyone should know. 3 days ago, Michael met with a divorce attorney at his mother's suggestion. He was exploring his options before the holidays. Several family members gasped. Michael's father stood up, his expression thunderous as he looked at his son. Is this true? Michael's silence was answer enough. I gathered my purse and the prenuptial agreement. I won't be going back to our home tonight, Michael. My lawyer will contact you next week. I turned to Vivian one last time. You've worked so hard to get rid of me for 5 years. Congratulations. You've finally succeeded. As I walked toward the door, Michael hurried after me. Emily, wait. It wasn't like that. I love you. I was confused, that's all. I paused in the doorway, suddenly exhausted. The problem, Michael, is that I believe you. You do love me. But you love your mother's approval more, and that will never change. I met his eyes one last time. I deserve better than being third place in my own marriage. With that, I walked out of the Campbell estate, leaving the stunned silence of the dining room behind me. As I drove away, I felt a complex mix of grief and overwhelming relief. The marriage was over, but for the first time in years, I could breathe freely. I filed for divorce the day after Thanksgiving. In keeping with the prenuptial agreement, I asked for nothing except my personal belongings and the assets I'd brought into the marriage. My lawyer was shocked. You know we could contest the prenup, she argued. Given the circumstances and your contributions to the marriage, we could potentially get half the brownstone at least. But I was firm in my decision. I don't want anything associated with the Campbells. I just want this chapter closed as quickly and cleanly as possible. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, moving arrangements, and emotional processing. I found a sleek apartment in Tribeca, threw myself into work, and started therapy twice weekly. What I didn't expect was the fallout within the Campbell family. 3 days after Thanksgiving, I received a surprise call from William Campbell, Michael's father. I'd like to meet for coffee if you're willing, he said formally. Curiosity won out over caution, and I agreed. The following afternoon, I found myself sitting across from my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law at a quiet cafe, far from both our usual neighborhoods. What happened at Thanksgiving was unacceptable, he began without preamble. Vivian's behavior has been unconscionable for years, and I bear responsibility for not intervening sooner. His directness surprised me. I've spent 50 years adapting to Vivian's difficult personality, he continued, looking tired. I told myself it was easier to accommodate her than confront her. I see now the damage that approach has caused. He looked at me with genuine regret. I want you to know that I always thought you were good for Michael. You challenged him to be better, to stand on his own merits rather than the family name. I thanked him for his kindness but assured him my decision was final. It's not just about Vivian. It's about Michael's unwillingness to choose our marriage over her approval. William nodded sadly. For what it's worth, there's been something of a reckoning since you left. Michael's siblings have finally spoken up about Vivian's pattern of interference. Even Rebecca Wellington sent a family-wide email declining any further invitations and expressing her embarrassment at being used as a pawn. In the following weeks, I received similar calls from Michael's siblings and even a few extended family members, all expressing support and regret for remaining silent over the years. Michael himself called and texted constantly at first, alternating between desperate pleas for reconciliation and angry accusations of public humiliation. Vivian, I heard through the grapevine, was telling anyone who would listen that I had orchestrated a vicious character assassination and manipulated the family against her. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly, given my refusal to contest any terms of the prenup. 6 months after Thanksgiving, I sat across from Michael in our attorney's offices to sign the final papers. He looked thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a defeated posture. I've been seeing a therapist 3 times a week, he told me as we waited for the attorneys to prepare the documents. I'm starting to understand how dysfunctional my relationship with my mother has always been. He reached across the table tentatively. I know it's probably too late, but I want you to know I've finally set boundaries with her. We're barely speaking. I didn't take his hand, but I did offer a gentle smile. I'm glad you're getting help, Michael. You deserve to live your own life, not the one Vivian scripted for you. I still love you, Em, he said quietly. Can we try again? I'm different now. I shook my head. Some broken things can't be repaired. But I hope we can both find happiness eventually. As I signed my name on the final page of our divorce decree, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and liberation. A 5-year chapter of my life was ending, but I was emerging stronger, with clearer boundaries and a deeper understanding of my own worth. The following year was one of profound personal growth. I channeled my energy into my career, making full partner at the firm and opening a pro bono division specializing in family law for underprivileged women. I reconnected with old friends, developed new hobbies, and slowly rebuilt my sense of self outside the shadow of the Campbell family drama. Through therapy, I worked through the lingering effects of years of gaslighting and manipulation, learning to trust my perceptions again. On the 1-year anniversary of the Thanksgiving confrontation, I received an unexpected email from Vivian. I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you privately, was all it said. After careful consideration and discussion with my therapist, I agreed to meet her at a public restaurant of my choosing. Vivian arrived precisely on time, looking older and somehow smaller than I remembered. Without the backing of her family estate and dining table, she seemed almost ordinary. Thank you for agreeing to see me, she began stiffly. I've been required to do considerable reflection this past year. My behavior toward you was inexcusable. It wasn't exactly an apology, but from Vivian it was unprecedented. My therapist suggests I have narcissistic tendencies and an unhealthy enmeshment with my son, she continued, the clinical terms sounding rehearsed. The family has insisted on changes if I wish to remain part of their lives. I nodded, unsure what response she expected. I don't forgive you, Vivian, I said finally, but I'm grateful for the clarity your actions ultimately brought to my life. She flinched slightly, but nodded. Michael misses you terribly, she said, a last attempt at manipulation. He's not the same without you. That's not why you asked to meet me, I replied calmly, and his happiness is no longer my responsibility. We parted ways after a stilted 30 minutes, and I never saw Vivian Campbell again. 2 years after my divorce was finalized, I received an invitation to Michael's wedding to a fellow therapist he'd met during his recovery journey. I declined to attend, but sent a kind note wishing them well. Life continued to unfold in unexpected ways. At 35, I made named partner at the firm, becoming Harrington Price & Parker Associates. I dated occasionally, approached relationships with greater wisdom and stronger boundaries. I even decided to pursue motherhood on my own terms, working with a fertility specialist and sperm donor. When my daughter Sophia was born, she became the center of my world, a family of my own making, built on unconditional love rather than obligation or approval. Looking back at my years with the Campbells, I realize now that what appeared to be a story about a difficult mother-in-law was actually about self-worth and boundaries. I stayed for years because I didn't value myself enough to demand better. I kept trying to win approval from people who had decided, long before meeting me, that I would never be good enough. The greatest lesson I learned from that Thanksgiving confrontation wasn't about standing up to a bully, though that was certainly satisfying in the moment. The real lesson was learning that I didn't need anyone's approval to validate my worth. Sometimes walking away isn't a failure, but the most powerful choice you can make. If you're in a relationship where you're constantly diminished, where your accomplishments are threats rather than celebrations, where you're always apologizing for taking up space, know that you deserve better. The people who are meant to be in your life will celebrate your strength, not feel threatened by it. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against someone who tried to diminish your worth? What finally gave you the courage to draw that line? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. Thank you for listening to mine, and remember, the most important approval you'll ever need is your own. Wishing you the strength to recognize your worth and the courage to protect it, always.